Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Seddon and Lacey's Comic Book Stash, where this week it is top fives. So, before we get into those, like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that YouTube stuff. So, Sed, it is time. I will let you go first. What is number 5?
So, what I was going to say, I mean, just as a quickie, I know we mentioned it on the last episode, but I think we've both kind of gone for pretty much the same criteria here, haven't we? We've gone for a story arc that would make a top 5 for us because of, I guess, whatever our own personal reasons are for it making a top 5. But we'll go through them. We'll go through, I guess, those reasons as we get through it. But yeah, my number 5. Now, this is one that's I wouldn't necessarily recommend as the greatest story ever written, which is always a good start for when you're saying top 5, isn't it? Selling it well. But it's going back to some stuff we talked about in the Origin episode, and I guess it resonates with me quite a lot. And it is Secret Wars, which was a Marvel event. And it was back in the days when events were just starting. So for those people who aren't big into comic books, event comics are generally a load of the characters, a load of their franchises, all appearing in one place at one time. So Secret Wars was quite an interesting one because it dovetailed not only being an event comic, but also it was primarily designed because they wanted to sell some toys. They'd done a deal with, and I think, with Mattel, and Mattel wanted something to sell their line of toys. So they approached Marvel, and it was the editor-in-chief at the time, Jim Shooter, and said, make us a comic that will get people to buy this stuff that we're selling. And I think to a degree that kind of possibly speaks to the quality of some of the writing. So your base premise is a load of the heroes. And I would say most of the big named heroes and a load of the villains suddenly are transported off of planet Earth into a random spaceship. And they're taken to a place called Battleworld, where a weird, mysterious being called the Beyonder says that they have to fight each other, and whichever side wins gets their heart's desire, their greatest thing. And so really it is a 12-issue fight scene. And maybe I'm doing it a little bit of a disservice there because there are some character moments in there and there are some story moments, but it is very base written because it really was written for a crowd to bring people in. Now, I guess the question is, well, as you're not selling it so well, why would this make a top 5? Well, going back to like my origins, I got to learn who so many of these characters were in one go. It really was for me a big sort of tentpole moment of going, suddenly I knew more than Spider-Man. I mean, it was my first introduction to the X-Men, and I suddenly knew who Wolverine was and Cyclops was and Professor X was. I knew who She-Hulk was, because up until that point, I'd only known of the Hulk and the TV show The Hulk. I got to know who all of these villains were, and all of a sudden this whole world was kind of opened up to me. So from a quality standpoint, would I say it's the greatest thing ever written? No, but as we said, like if you said to people, where do you start? Now, probably I wouldn't recommend someone now starting because it is, oh God, I can't do the maths, but probably 30 plus years old at this point. But it will always stick with me as being that place where I guess a love for a lot of those characters grew from. And it is beautifully drawn by Mike Zeck. Again, I think when you could have, and what you tend to see now is a lot of the events either have the greatest artists on it or a rotating cast because people are going to come along because it's got that big whiz bang moment. And from comic book whiz bang moments, probably the most notable thing that come out of it was the introduction of Spider-Man's black costume, which later on turns into being Venom, which is obviously now a huge character in there. But yeah, my top 5, my number 5 in my top 5 is Secret Wars.
So, it's not the first time something's been created to sell toys. Look at He-Man, look at Mask.
Well, and I think they were very much following that model. I think at that stage, I think they probably realised that creating cartoons was actually very expensive. And I think it was their dabble into using comic books as that medium. Now, I will say they did 2 series of the toys. they weren't very popular. They didn't sell very well, and I don't think they ever dabbled in that same way again. So it was a hard lesson for them. I do not own any of the toys. So back then, I didn't know about the toys. I didn't know how to get them. I think if with my random buying of stuff, one day I will own that whole line of toys. However, some are ridiculously expensive these days. So retirement, maybe I'll get those figures in my house.
And have some space for them.
Yeah. When I've built on the third wing. So when I've built for my comic wing, my pop wing, and then I'll have my my comic book memorabilia wing in my house. And strangely enough, the ones that are worth the most are ones that weren't even featured in the comic, because when they started to spin out into season 2 of their toys, they just put random characters in. There is, as a small kind of factoid to add on to it, there is a Secret Wars 2 that followed, I think, 2 years later in the comic books. Very, very different, very, very odd, very, very dated if you try and read that. And later on in Marvel's publishing careers, there have been other stories called Secret Wars, but they are only tangentially linked it to this. But yeah, fond memories more than anything else. so come on, what's number 5 for you?
Number 5. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. Basically, it is a what-if story. Deadpool has been given a contract out on all of the Marvel Universe, and it was the first Deadpool that my mate, he just gave it to me. It was in the pub one afternoon, and when I've read this, do you want it? And that was my introduction to Deadpool and the breaking of the fourth wall and the violence and the gore. And I was just like, this isn't what you normally get with Marvel. And I was just like, fuck yeah. And it is it the greatest of stories? Probably not. But is it ultra violent? Yes. Is it funny? Yes. Does Deadpool be Deadpool? Yeah. And it made me find and love Deadpool. So, it's one of those, it was an introduction to a character that I had no prior knowledge to being one of my favourites.
And he is an interesting character from that regard, isn't he? Because, obviously now we've seen 2 successful movies for him, and I think he really has found a wider audience in the wider world. But yeah, you're right. I think certainly from a Marvel Universe side, that kind of breaking the fourth wall element, it's stuff that you don't normally see. And again, it's that things that pull you in and pique your interest and go, this isn't what I'm used to. And as you say, like, the violence, the swords, the guns, the murder, the sexual reference jokes, it's kind of got something for, it runs the gamut of kids, well, not necessarily all Deadpool stuff, but some Deadpool stuff, kids can kind of read it and go, oh, isn't it funny? He kind of turns and winks to the camera right the way up to stuff like all the way. Funny enough, not one I've read. So I think I will kind of add that to my list. I've read quite a bit of Deadpool along the way, but with Deadpool, he has so much, I think he was a character that ballooned in popularity, and they've released so much material that actually it would be very hard to have read all of the Deadpool at this point.
Yeah. And the thing is, with Deadpool, it's one of those characters where, yes, he has his own story arcs, but he can quite easily be just chucked into something else and cause chaos. Yet
that character type plays really well, or actually doesn't play well, but vibes really well with anyone else in that universe, doesn't it? From the most sort of straight-laced people to the comedy characters they've got to everything in between. So yeah, I'm with you on really liking Deadpool, but yeah, as I say, not a series or not a story arc that I've read. Although I kind of like the idea of it, because I presumably does it. Spoilers, but does he kill the Marvel Universe?
He gets for a few.
Good. Because again, it'd be a shame if he didn't, wouldn't it? Like if you're going to lead off with that as your title, it would be slightly disappointing if there wasn't at least some murder, death, killing there somewhere along the way. But
there's murder, there's death, there's kill, there's blood, everything you need.
And I did notice the visual aid you had there. I also have some visual aids. I didn't. Funny enough, like when we talk about collected editions, I don't have Secret Wars in a collected edition, and there's one of the other ones that I don't have in a collected edition, because I do have the original copies of them, which I carefully get out of storage every now and again and go, oh my god, one day these are just going to disintegrate in my hand, because they were overread when I was at the age when I bought them. So, who writes Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe?
It is Cullen Bunn and Double Tunic.
See, I've got a few Cullen Bunn series and more non-Marvel stuff than that, and always been a fan. So yeah, that will definitely go on my to-read list. I get a feeling this to-read list is going to become extensive over a short period of time.
But when you come down, worst case scenario, you can borrow it.
Nice. I like a bit of swapsies.
So, what is your number 4?
Well, number 4 is getting a little bit more modern and a visual aid. It is Made to Suffer, which is one of the Walking Dead story arcs. So, from a comic book sense, this is from I'll check in a minute what issues it was published in, but it's volume 8 of the trade. So we are a chunk of a way into the Walking Dead story at this point, and I don't know. I think probably people, if anyone's watching who isn't from a comic book background, they'll probably know the Walking Dead from the TV show, and it is a key moment that they also do in the TV show. And strangely enough, it was the point where I stopped watching the TV show because I was so bitterly disappointed that they didn't do as compelling or as good a job as they did in the comic. But generally, the TV show follows the comic book relatively closely, with just the addition of a couple of characters. So we are following Rick through the world of the zombie apocalypse. Why volume 8 of this? Well, I liked the series from my first reading of it. I'd been out of comics for a little bit at that time. I think I was burnt out on superhero stuff. I didn't really have anything to settle down on, and I'd kind of heard about this semi-popular Image published black and white zombie comic, and I like zombie movies, I like horror movies, so I thought, well, let's give it a go. And I was hooked by issue 1. Now, strangely enough, issue 1, as the TV show does, is very similar to 28 Days Later, and yeah. I think who knows what is actually true, but there's certainly some talk of they were written concurrently and no one copied. We'll let lawyers sort that out. But I kind of followed the adventures of these characters as they're going through the world of trying to survive a zombie apocalypse. Now, this particular story focuses on the governor, and the governor is a character in the TV show. Now, at this point they've met the governor previously, and they've had a bad run-in with him, and they've settled in a prison. And it was just, what really grabbed me about it is the comic book had done a very formulaic thing up until that point. They'd kind of walked, ran, moved away from the zombies. They'd found some human beings that maybe were coping with the world slightly different. But we had a period just before this where they settled down. They found this prison and they settled down, and they started to build a community, build a farm, and almost make their way in the world. And it was such a strange thing, because for about 5 or 6 issues preceding this arc, I kind of went, this is really interesting. This is interesting to see. Like, it almost felt like it's what happens when people settle down in a terrible world. And then this arc comes, and the governor invades the prison. Now, for a large part of it, it is very action oriented. And I am going to avoid some spoilers. So I am going to tiptoe around what I like about it so much. But there is a moment towards the end of the story arc, which is one of the most brutal and affecting moments I've ever had reading a comic book. And it really was a moment where I just went, oh my God, I cannot believe they did that. And I think it makes my top 5 because it reminded me what any storytelling, but in particular comic books, can do. And it's a combination of the words, but particularly the visuals in this. And I don't know, it felt like someone had just run up and given me an absolute kick in the nuts. And it left me kind of knocked for a long period of time. And so, as I say, it stays with me and resonates with me because it reminds me how powerful a story can be. And bollocks to the TV show, because they really, really, really messed it up, and they were cowards and didn't do this thing that they were supposed to do. But but yeah, I mean, the whole series, and I've read the whole of The Walking Dead. It has peaks, it has troughs, it has great bits throughout. But yeah, this was it's pinnacle for me. This was getting you to love a random group of characters and then do some really bad shit to them, and that mixture of that feeling of loss, but also anger. Like, it was, how dare they do this to the characters that I love? So yeah, just really kind of affecting for me, and fantastic.
See, this is the thing with like Walking Dead. I did the first few seasons of the TV show, and then got told obviously it was a comic books arc, and it was all sort of done. I was just like, the comics intrigued me enough to sort of go, I could see how they've done this, but the TV show lost me.
Yeah,
so much that I'm like, do I have the interest to go for it as books? And the thing is, because they are quite expensive.
Yeah.
It's one of those of do you go and start it? But I'm intrigued by the fact that it's all in black and white and that sort of thing.
Well, recently they've done some reprints of it and they've coloured it, and I've not looked at that because again, for me, it's black and white, and the artist, it's not the artist that starts on it, but the artist that does the bulk of the series, Charlie Adlard, and I don't know, he just had such a great style for it, and it just suited that black and white. Strangely enough, and again, I think stuff that we'll probably pick up on as the weeks go by. It is quite tough because I think if you've watched it in a medium or vice versa, I think it does impact your enjoyment. So I think I'd have enjoyed the TV show more if I hadn't read the comic book.
Yeah.
But I think if I'd only watched the TV show, I don't think I'd have gone on and read the comic book. Because I think I would feel like, why am I paying for this again? A story that I have already seen and experienced. But certainly for me, having done a bit of both of them, the comic is so much better than the TV show. Now, funny enough, the guy who wrote it, Robert Kirkman, I mean, he sort of said doing the TV show allowed him to undo some of the mistakes he felt he made in the comic book. But I think it lost something by that. I think sometimes, I mean, spoilers for early on in the comic book, Rick loses his hand really early on, and he said he always regretted it because then he had to think of stories where your hero only had one hand. And so he said doing a TV show allowed him to change that. But for me, I guess that made him have to be more creative. It made him have to use that as a plot point because he'd kind of done it and committed to it. And there was one particular death very early on in the comic book where he said, "Oh, well, I didn't kill that person in the show because I always regretted not being able to write that person more." But you play the cards that you've dealt yourself, don't you? But yeah, certainly, I would heartily recommend The Walking Dead. I think if you were going to jump into where my top 4 is, I think it does behoove having read what come before it, because I think it makes it more impactful. And again, maybe there'll be a bit of a lensy for you going forward, because I do have them all in not only hardback but in softback as well, because I just can't stop myself. There's something wrong with me. I've got a sickness. So over to you for your numero 4.
Number 4 is very important to me because this is the one that got me back into going into newer stuff and not just going, I've got the Killing Joke, I've got the sort of the stuff that I knew. Is the New 52 Court of Owls Volume 1. It was a start of a story arc. It was a perfect place to jump in on. It was one of the ones that the guy recommended to me, that, as I said, when I was buying, when I bought Killing Joke and was buying those first few, and he went, read these. If you don't get on with the first one, you're fine.
Yeah.
But there is a 12-issue arc of those sort of ones. And I absolutely loved it. It was the whole secret society, what's been really going on in under Gotham. And because of it being the New 52, and you do need to have some knowledge of Batman and characters, because it doesn't spoon feed you who people are, but you don't need to know what's happened in the last 5-10 years religiously. to get into it and start from there. And it's just such a good story arc of like for the whole run, but just that idea of there being the Masons of Gotham City that are really in control and also causing chaos. And yeah, that was the one that I was just like, this is my back in.
It's a story arc I share your love for. And in fact, I said to you beforehand, sneakily hiding behind me, and one day I'll get the hang of pointing, but there is an owl hidden on the shelf behind me. He's concealed by characters from Breaking Bad and a Nintendo GameCube. But yeah, I have a mask from the Court of Owls. You said that about the New 52. Again, for pure absolute comic book novices. Certainly, like the bigger universes like DC and Marvel, they do have like a tendency every now and again to reboot. And sometimes they're seen as good jumping on points. And I can't remember what year this was, but DC did a whole line reboot and they called it the New 52. And this was the absolute standout for me. Of all the series they released, I did dip in and try a lot of them. And you're right. I think it
2012.
So, and I think it not only it allows you a jumping in point, it allows you to not feel like you've missed out on 70 years worth of publishing. You can kind of just go in, but it is Batman. You know, you're not having to go through kind of endless origin story and maybe being spoon-fed stuff. It understands that even if it is your first Batman comic, you've probably seen the Batman animated series, you've probably seen the Batman movies. So there's a kind of amount of knowledge there. And yeah, I loved it. Scott Snyder, who wrote it, I'm sure there might be some more coming up in your list. And I know we'll do a lot of Batman over the coming episodes, but Batman's got some amazing stories out there, really has. And some of those being kind of in continuity, some of it being kind of just lightly touching continuity. But I think this was the first time that I religiously collected a Batman series. I was not going to miss an issue of this. And I think this was kind of a real transcendent long run for me. And as I say, that was the real highlight. It was the best story of the run for me. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on this one.
And it's that thing, it is, because obviously they've done a New 52 for everyone. Because I know there's like the Flash has a set, Spider-Superman has a set, and things like that. And as you said, you do need to know who people are, but it's a base level of, do you know who the Riddler is? Here he is. Do you know who Joker is? Here he is.
Yeah.
And yes, it touches on a few bits, like in some of the later ones, of stuff that's happened before in previous ages, but it also tells you what happened. So you sort of go, it'll refer back to something, but then it'll tell you why you need to know it. And I just thought it was the perfect thing to jump in. And as I said, that was the one that got me back in.
So I think what may on a later episode cause a little bit of controversy between the two of us is, and I love this run and I love Scott Snyder's run. I think it's amazing. I love the run that come out after it more. I love Tom King's run on it. And you know, we'll probably touch on that in later episodes. But yes, Snyder was, when I read that Snyder one, I thought, other than the moments that, again, we'll touch on some of the great writers and some of the greatest comic book writers and artists have done Batman. But for a consistent run, I must admit, as I was reading it, I was thinking, no one's ever going to top this boy for a long series of this. And then the next guy come along and I went, oh, I think we found someone better. But I don't think you necessarily share my extreme love for what came after.
I've not read it.
Oh, there's going to be a little bit of reading homework for later on down the line.
So yeah, so I did the New 52, and that was because they weren't cheap.
No.
They were like 20 quid a pop. So sort of like when you got all 12 episodes or 12 issues, it did get a bit of thing. So sort of I haven't jumped into another run yet. But if you're recommending them, then I mean, as I say, maybe for a later show we could
we might look at doing maybe the first trade or the first 6 issues, whatever terminology we want to use. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a spot on pick. And we said about that stuff that means something to us, but stuff that other people could jump into. And bearing in mind, 2012, so what, like 9 years old now, but 9 years in the comic book world isn't that old. And I think there's no chance it will feel dated. Like if you said to someone, oh, here's a great run from the 70s, it's going to have that kind of 70s flavor, flair, costumes and look and things like that. Whereas this is still so close to now that, I'd have no qualms with handing any of the bits in this run, but obviously generally sort of starting from issue 1 to a non-comic book reader or a lapsed one or someone who has an interest in superheroes and go, have a go at this. I think you'll like it.
Yeah, because obviously there are a few that are in my collection that do hold a lot of time to me, but I wouldn't sort of go, oh, someone new, try these, because I've got a few of like the 80s stuff, so like the Frank Miller Batmans and things like that, which are great, but they do look their age.
Yeah.
Whereas that, and one of the things I'll be going on about later, they have such a look about them that they could have come out right now.
Yeah, I think the pencil was Greg Capullo on most of those issues, wasn't it? Or if not all of them. And again, like lovely drawing style. I'd seen him. I think you mentioned it in the last episode where you mentioned the Spawn movie. And I think my main experience with him as an artist was some of the Spawn comics, which you can see some of that in maybe the cape work that he has for this run. But yeah, oh god, he makes all of those characters. You know who you're looking at, even if it's like just one of the coppers in the background. He's got such a distinct art style. You really do pick up on who's who in it very, very quickly and very easily.
Yep. So, numero 3.
So this is a jump back into the superhero world. Again, not one that I own in a collected edition. It's one that I own the single issues for, and it is an Avengers story. Now, I mentioned about Avengers being a team that was one of my first experience of superheroes. So they've kind of always been in my eye line or my mindset for that. And it's such a strange experience because I see the movie juggernaut that is the Avengers now. Everyone knows who the Avengers is. Everyone, you walk into a random place anywhere and say, who are the Avengers? They will reel them off because of all the movies. However, for most of my life, if I walked into a room and said, who are the Avengers? You might get someone say the TV show, but most people say, what are you talking about? Get out of this room. But I think it was... So when I really started to kick into getting Marvel superhero stuff, the X-Men were the biggest thing since sliced bread. They were the things that sold everything. They were considered the best stories. And don't get me wrong, there's some fantastic X-Men stories out there, but I had this kind of affinity with Avengers. And there's one particular storyline that, because a lot of the Avengers stuff is crap. I will tell you that. As much as I love them, for probably about 15 years of my reading, they didn't really have good writers. They didn't really care about it as a franchise. It was terrible. But there was one particular storyline relatively early on in my reading career. Can I call it a career? But it was, it's generally referred to now as Avengers Under Siege, but it didn't, I think, have that title at the time. But this is... So in the movies, for anyone who's not a comic book reader, you see that they have like the Avengers town, they have the Avengers base. Well, for most of the years of the Avengers, they had the Avengers mansion. And it was a place where they all kind of met, had their meetings and stuff like that. And that's the only thing you ever saw it for. And this story starts with the bad guys, the Masters of Evil. And I know it's very kind of a hackneyed name for it, but this was the 80s when they released it. The Masters of Evil turn up and they just kick the shit out of the Avengers. They take the mansion. They beat up Jarvis, who in this wasn't a computerized voice. He was a Englishman and a butler. They kidnap the staff, and then over the court, and they put up a impenetrable barrier around the mansion, and basically the bad guys win. And I loved it. And it was the first time I'd ever experienced something like that. You said about Deadpool being that moment where in comics you kind of go, what? They do that, and I'd never. I mean, you have those moments of peril in superhero stuff, but this was a definitive for most of the story. The bad guys had won, and they had totally taken into town. And you saw frailties. So one of the storylines at the time was the god Hercules, who was kind of in as a bit of a replacement for Thor at the time. I think they'd had him off on a different story in his own. He was an alcoholic. And actually, part of what really goes wrong is he goes out on the piss and then tries to have a fight when he's drunk. And again, he takes an absolute tonking. One of their members gets beaten into a coma because of it. And you suddenly see this frailty for these superheroes that I'd only ever seen them win. I'd seen them, very easily turn the tide. And I mean, somewhat of a spoiler. The good guys do ultimately turn it around, but it takes kind of a lot of effort and a lot of sacrifice. But it always stuck with me because it's the first time that I saw, I guess, the weaknesses in them. Superman doesn't like kryptonite, but generally that would hold him down for a couple of seconds and he'd find a way out of it. But this was a concerted way to go, do you know what? These bad guys are bastards. And when they actually group together, and if they can put aside their petty shittiness to each other, they're a serious threat. And it stayed with me ever since. Really, really love it. The guy who wrote it, Roger Stern, when I say about how many bad Avengers stories there were, most of his run was really good. And unfortunately, and he did a load of Spider-Man stuff as well, which is really good. But unfortunately, he had a bit of a falling out with the editors at the time and kind of left. And I went for years without really doing anything mainstream again, but I absolutely love this. And as I say, I think for me it stays with me because it did something I had never seen before. And I've seen it done loads of times since, but it will always stay with me as the first time that I saw that heroes were not infallible, that heroes were I say this a lot at the moment to my mother. I always like to mention my mother at some point of going, there's that point in your life where your parents stop being your parents anymore, and you realise that they're grown-ups, and they're as messed up as you are, and they make the same amount of mistakes. Well, this was that kind of awakening for me with superheroes, that they were just like me, and they were as likely to be, as likely to go out on the piss and mess everything up as I am as well.
Yeah, that's one of those sort of. Again, it's not one that I've read, but I mean, as you said, there's been plenty of them where you do get the bad guys win, redemption. They are human. Obviously, the one thing that I know we're both reading recently is Nightfall, which is obviously the Batman one, where run Batman into the ground so Bane can fuck him up. He is human. Everyone has them, but it's just how well they can do them. And obviously, that being your first one of them, and it's that realization moment of, they're not gods.
Yeah, and I think I didn't have another 20 years of seeing that story done over and over again to make me jaded to it. And I think legitimately at the time, I thought, blimey, they've lost. Is this? And there was points where I actually thought, is this the end? Are they going to end it here? And they did have relatively long-term storytelling elements of some of those characters didn't kind of come back from what happened to them for years. Whereas I think, again, cyclically now, with the amount of content that's produced and probably the attention span of people, that's probably 2 issues later, that's all done. But it's a story archetype that I just never said I hadn't seen in that medium, should I say.
Yeah.
How about you? Number 3. Number 3. I'm putting that in because we might put some snazzy after effects in, but also my lack of skill might fail. So if we go number 3, just in case.
So this is a run which, if I'd have had my way and the money at the time, would have cost me a small fortune, because I would have bought every variant cover, all 7 for each issue. The 3 Jokers. I did limit myself to just 1 of each. Basically, it is a universe where there are all 3 types of Joker. You've got the comedian, so the more modern psychopath Joker from The Killing Joke. You've got the clown version, sort of, so the Death in the Family, where he kills Jason Todd.
Yeah.
And also an old school original Joker, which is, the criminal who's basically there just to cause carnage and, steal things. And yes, it is a run that you need to know your backstories, because you need to know about the fact that he killed Jason Todd, and you need to know the Killing Joke, and you need to know bits like that. But it's the only one that I've physically hunted around to make sure that I would get issues.
Yeah.
Because at the time, DC had a deal where they weren't selling to UK comic book shops just as this was about to be released.
Beautiful timing.
Yeah. And it then got to the point where I was like, oh, right. And then all the variants covers started being shown. I was like, I want that one. I want that one. And at £8 a pop, I was like, I can't justify buying all 7 for each issue. So yeah, but it's one of those of, you can now get it as a whole book, which I'm tempted to get, so then they can be sat in their cellophane bags and never touched with greasy hands ever again. But yeah, it's just, I love the Joker. If you can see, I have a Joker tattoo. It is just the perfect Joker story, and how it ends is perfect, which obviously I won't go into spoilers of, but it has the perfect ending. And it's not canon. They've come out and said this was completely fan service of what if every version of the Joker was there at the same time. But it was one of those of, to me, it lived up to the hype of it as soon as they announced it. It is a great read, and as I said, just one of those of that I had to get it as soon as they came out.
I think what you're saying there about it sort of not being canon as well, I think that's one thing that Batman and the Joker really lend themselves to, don't they? They lend themselves to them being these great archetype characters that you can tell a really interesting story with, and it doesn't have to be sequential. It doesn't have to be issue 72. It doesn't have to be issue 280. You can just go, let's use these characters. And again, for the non-comic book fans, for anyone who watched the Joker movie and like that, you go, this is the power of these characters, of going, you can just very easily spin them out into their own story in a universe you've never seen before, but you understand them very quickly, and then it pulls you into the world around it. And it really has an odd origin as well, because I know you say it's not canon, but it was going to be. It actually comes off of a canon story, doesn't it? Where they say there are 3 Jokers, and it was some strange quirk and some firings in the background at the company because of maybe some unhappiness with publishing decision that made it be a story on its own. But I think it's served by that. I think it actually plays better because they weren't tied to again the next issue needing to pay off in it in the next issue. So yeah, sometimes I think that really does work.
And they have announced that there's potentially going to be another run. So again, but there's the thing, because it is, I hate to use the word its own universe, but it's its own thing. It does, as you say, it's not canon, so it doesn't have to be or take into anything else. It can just carry on from where it stopped, and doesn't matter what else has happened in the last sort of year since it's come out, that they can go absolutely nuts with it. And the guys that have done it, I will love to see what they do with it.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about comics, is that you get these stories, and you can tell as many or as few as you want. Sometimes it's just a one and done, or it's a 6 issues and done. But actually, if they've got more interesting things to tell with those characters, that universe, that world, they'll come back. As I say, I'm sure when we get into later episodes, we probably will get into some where I go, I wish they'd never gone back to it, because sometimes it can tarnish that first product. But yeah, I'm with you on that. Cracking. And I'm sure there will be many more Joker mentions as we go forward. But yeah, Joker, what a character! What a character! I mean, and again, I think what this speaks to is how they've iterated him over time to keep him with a modern-esque feel, but never really changing that aesthetic too much. But again, power of comics of going, sometimes you just need to refresh and reinvigorate them, don't you? And I think that kind of clown prince of crime maniac always allows for him to be put into any era, any time, any story, and play well.
It's like I've got like an omnibus of a load of old school, like golden age Joker stories, and other than the art style and how they're drawn, because obviously them being from like the 50s and 60s is, you know, different, shall we say, to what we're used to now. The stories are still the same. You know, he's not as brutal and as violent and maniacal, but he's still wanting to cause chaos just for the sake of causing chaos. You know, that's the great thing about someone like Joker, of him being so timeless, because he doesn't have that standard motive of I want to be rich, or I want to control the world, or I want to overtake the government, or anything like that. His motive is he just likes fucking anarchy.
Yep.
It can go into any timeline, and you can do so much with it.
Well, and it probably resonates with us because we've all got a measure of that inside us, haven't we? That kind of what would happen if we just let ourselves go, if we just went a bit crazy. Yeah, that brilliant stuff. Yeah, really big fan, and I think we probably will cover a lot of Joker along the way. In fact, I imagine at some point when we're doing some of the Batman stuff and things like that, God, we may end up even doing an episode or two just purely on the Joker, because I think there's that much to kind of go through, isn't he? I think he's that interesting to talk about all the iterations of him, from comic books to TV to movies, and what that character actually is and what he means to people, and I guess what our interpretation, who is the Joker? You know, one of the beautiful things, I know they do it in this, of the three Jokers, is that constant, and I won't go too far into this because I feel it will definitely come up, possibly even this episode, but like that always kind of unknown origin of the Joker, you know, like that's the beauty of it, of going, every time you see him, the fact that it's kind of never been set in stone necessarily, or always been sort of changed, is that there's always that level of interest. Who is the Joker? Why is the Joker? Things like that.
Yeah. So what is number 2?
So my number 2 is, and again, visual aid. And we did laugh about this beforehand, because I know you had one there as well, but it's in the cellophane wrapper still. So you may well say, how the bloody hell can that be your number 2? You haven't even opened it. Well, it's one of the ones that I own in single issues, I own in softback, and I own in hardback. And I've kind of just not taken the hardback out of the cellophane because I probably won't read it in that format. I just really wanted it because I thought that will look dead sexy on my shelf, and it's one of my favourite series of all time. I'm not going to go into massive depth on this because it is one that I would like to probably talk about at longer length on another show at a certain point. I guess like I'll only kind of fly into it on a face value of saying, like, this is much like you were saying with the Court of Owls. This is a relatively modern storyline, so I think, you know, it doesn't have that barrier of entry that some things would, because you know, like, the aesthetic is totally off, and I think it would be comfortable for people. And strangely enough, obviously, we've recently had Vision in the Avengers movies, and we've had the WandaVision TV show. So my kind of origin with Vision is he was a very big character in the Avengers comic books. He's an android with a heart, an android that can love, an android with a brain. And over the years, there've been a few very, very good stories with him involved. You know, some of it being the more generic stuff. You know, he turns evil, like someone overtakes his brain, is a robot. Some of the stuff that you see cut into that WandaVision series. Why do I love this one so much? Well, I would say that of modern series and modern superhero stuff, it really stood out for me. So funny when we were talking about that Batman run, and I hinted at the run I loved after that, which is written by a guy called Tom King. Well, Tom King writes this Vision run, and it's 12 issues, and it's a very, very different story. He's allowed to go off into a corner of the universe whilst using familiar characters, and it's about Vision wanting his own family, and he creates a family, and he creates other android versions and imprints them with brain patterns of characters from the Marvel universe. And it's just, for me, it was a beautiful look, and it really spoke to when comics can be great. And there's so many examples of it, but I think I'm always impressed when they do it in a generic superhero setting. And yeah, it's a look at the modern family, what family actually means, what the desire for someone to have a family is, and what impacts the actions of the outside world can do to a self-contained unit that is very, very happy. But as soon as you start adding in other elements, how that happiness can be torn down very quickly. It's smart. It looks great. Art wise, it looks absolutely beautiful. It's got like a kind of really eerie, ethereal kind of theme to it. But yeah, as I say, I want to go into it at greater length. I will send one of my multiple copies your way, so that you can have a read of it at some point, because I'd love to dig into it, and I'd love to kind of speak to someone about it who's coming into it for the first time and see whether it resonates with them as well as it does with me. One of the things that it does maybe rely on is it does touch on a lot of the historical stuff. So it touches on the 40 plus years of history he has, but I felt like it gave you enough to understand what those story beats were, and you didn't have to necessarily have read all of that. But I don't know, maybe it wouldn't vibe so well with someone who hasn't read him over the years. But yeah, just
I suppose also with what we've had film and TV wise, that probably would fill in some of those gaps, I would imagine.
He has such a different origin in the comic books, but yeah, I mean, that baseline is there. You know, he's an android who, and again, this is years on. But he does have the story with Wanda in the comic book, so he does fall in love with a human, and you know, even that, you know, it even touches on that of going. You could almost describe it as, and I don't want to go too much further than this, but like, is this an android having a nervous breakdown? You know, and it touches on kind of so many interesting concepts. I mean, I'm loath to use this term too often, but for me, it's a masterpiece of its form. I think it's an amazingly written story, and I think when you tie that in with the art and the message it's trying to get across, yeah, for me it's pure magic. So that's why it's my number 2.
See, that's definitely something that I will have to obviously do lendies on that one.
You watch though, I'll lend it to you. Go, what are you talking about? That's crap. But again, I mean, I think that's the stuff of there is so much produced that it won't always be great for everyone. I mean, it won multiple Eisner Awards, which are, you know, the comic book equivalents of Oscars, but probably with a bit more cachet, because they do tend to lean into probably those more like affecting, interesting, and long-term stories that will stay with people. So I guess I've kind of got that to back up my love for it. But yeah, you know, like. Not everything's for everyone, but I mean, it's something that I would, and again, you know, we say about non-comic book readers, it is something I would hand to anyone and say, give it a read.
Yeah,
you know, it's still got that barrier of it's got pictures, and people might go, "What, are you a kid? Like, isn't this the Beano?" But I think, you know, like a few pages in, you go, "Well, this is something different. I've not seen anything like this before." A term we've used a number of times, and I think we'll continue to use. But yeah, so that it will stay with me for that reason.
So my number 2 is best known as a film, but fuck the film, the book's better. V for Vendetta. This is one of those of, obviously, like most people, didn't know about it until the film. And don't get me wrong, the film's amazing. I fucking love the film.
Yeah.
but this fills it out so much better. Obviously, Alan Moore, what can we say? Legend.
Comic god, I would say. Probably pound for pound the best comic book writer of all time, isn't he? I don't think there's anyone who comes close to the amount of amazing stories he has managed to amass in his lifetime.
Yeah, obviously you've got Watchmen, which is huge. You've got this, and yeah, it is all right. It does take from something like Orwell and 1984 with the whole, what if the government are taking over and we're in a fascist regime. But the thing that the book does better than the film is you get more of V and Evie and how much those two connect and feel for each other and want to protect each other. Obviously, they do it really well in the film, but as I said, the book it just is a bit deeper. Yeah, it is one of those of if you like the film, read that because it just will enhance what you already like about the film.
Yeah, it's got a lot more room to breathe and be expansive with its narrative, hasn't it? A film is confined to. I mean, God, don't get me wrong. If they'd have produced a 5-hour V for Vendetta movie, I'd have watched it. But that most people aren't going to because they're indoctrinated to go in anything over 2 hours, and I'm struggling a bit. Whereas the comic book allowed him to. I mean, that's again, I guess, something worth touching on is, and you said that with Watchmen as well. It was a limited series. As in, he knew his beginning, his middle, his end. He knew how he was going to hit those story beats. He knew the moments that he wanted, and comic books allowed him that format to do it. Whereas, once that gets in the hand of a movie studio, they've got different criteria that are going to. But yeah, I'm with you. I do think it's a good movie, but yes, it is. Whereas I was just saying about Vision as being, for me, a masterpiece, V for Vendetta sits in exactly that criteria for me. There are certain things that it probably falls outside of even don't like, where you just go, there's something really important about this. This is great. Yeah. Same way as novels. There's plenty of novels out there that I think are great that I wouldn't necessarily, aren't for me, but it is in that masterpiece range for me.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's one of those of, if you look at it, yes, obviously it is from the 80s, so the colour is a little bit off to what you'd expect nowadays, but it's got a timeless look to it, and it's very classy, and just, it is one of those that I think anyone who is into the art of comic books should have definitely read and should own.
Well, and as you say about that kind of timelessness about it, we've said it a few times. Like there's tons of comics from the 60s, there's tons of comics from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and every decade that goes by, that they age because they're wearing, people you see in the street are wearing the clothes of its time, and again the language used and maybe some of the points they get into, but I think at its core, even in 50 years' time, there's enough about this story that will still resonate with people. Because, let's be honest, the conspiracy and the government being untrustworthy and things like that, that element is always, well, I say always going to be there unless we hit some sort of Star Trek The Next Generation utopia where all food is free and I can listen to whatever song I want whenever I want for no money and go into a hollow room and play in the FA Cup final when Everton toppled Man United, that sort of thing. We're probably never going to reach that utopia. So there's always that kind of we the people element where you go, yes, you give this to someone. I mean, again, certain texts, be it books, be it comics, I think that actually the age of it is one of the more impressive things about it, because you could give it to let's say an 18, 19-year-old now, and they'll go, wow, they're talking about things that I think and that resonate with me, but they were doing that when this was
40 years ago.
You go, because some of these things are are quite universal. Those thoughts and feelings and that growth we go through, and something I know we said on the Origin episode of things hitting you at the right time of life. Like, I think if I'd have read this when I was 7-year-old me, if I'd have read this, I probably wouldn't have got it. I wouldn't have understood the storyline, but also I don't think I'd have understood the art style. You know, I wanted the colourful. I wanted Superman with his pants on the outside at that age and things like that. But these are the things that I think you grow into. You grow into these stories, and that's why I think it's such a great hobby. Is that there's things for all ages, all sexes, everything. You know, any criteria you are, I think there's a story out there for you. But yeah, this is one where I do think it kind of transcends a lot of groups, and yeah, you should be able to put this in anyone's hands, and at the very least, them to be impressed by it. Whether they like it or not, that's always a different matter. You know, that's your subjective thing. But I think they'd be impressed with the craft that created that story.
Yeah. So,
it's just weird because, like, when I was putting this together, I knew the 5 story arcs I wanted to cover, and I wasn't. I ummed and ahed about my number 1 for a while because the number 1. Oh, bollocks! I'm just going to go into it, and I'll explain why I ummed and ahed for a while. So my number 1, and this is a bit of a. This is the deluxe edition version of it, but actually it's the first arc of this, and it's Why the Last Man. So one of the reasons why I ummed and ahed is I haven't read this for a long time, and I'm a little bit scared to reread it because I'm a little bit fearful of some of that stuff we talked about. Is it of a time? And this was late 90s, early 2000s that Why the Last Man was released, and the premise of the story is that every man on the planet dies. Just instantaneously, they all die. And there's only one man left, and it is Yorick, and that's his name. And that's why it's Why the Last Man and the Y chromosome. And throughout the series, you follow him, and you follow him in this new world, this world without men. And, you know, it touches on so much of society at the time. You know, it talks about the gender gap. It talks about gender inequality. I remember it being really smartly written, but again, I've some slight fears that in the world that we live in now, would it feel as smartly written? So I guess, why is it my top 1? Well, this is my top 1 because this pulled me back into comics after my longest gap, and my longest gap. And I thought I was done with comics. After the original years, I thought I was done. I was totally burnt out on superheroes altogether. I didn't think there was anything out there for me. I'd read the Alan Moore stuff. I'd read all the big stuff, and there just didn't feel like there was enough out there to pull me back in. And just randomly one day I went into Ace Comics in Colchester after a long time of not going in there, and I walked through there, and I saw this on the shelf, and it was just called Why the Last Man. It's done by Vertigo, which was basically the mature readers line of DC, and I picked it up, and within that first within that first read, I just found my love for comics again, because again it was telling a story I'd never read before, and it was telling a story that I hadn't really even conceptually thought that comic books would tell. So it resonated so well. Now, weirdly enough, it's about to get a TV show. So I think it's due to release this year on FX, and I think they've had to kind of make some changes because, you know, they've had to modernize it. They've had to bring it sort of 20 years forward. But I'm intrigued to see where they go with that, and I'm intrigued to see whether it gains the popularity that it did for me. And as I say, I think it might just be that perfect series at the perfect time. And I guess I learned from it. I was who I was at that point. I guess I'd gone through my years of getting my moral code from superheroes, and I think it was at a time where I was going out there and learning to be me. And strangely enough, reading this kind of shaped a lot of my worldview. I think it turned some of my politics from being, oh God, this is a sick thing to admit out loud, but I probably was a bit more of a beer drinking, football watching Sun reader at the time. And I think this kind of, again, opened my eyes to going, everything isn't about that, and starting to look at the world with a different eye. So yeah, that's my number one, because I think it was the perfect comic at the perfect time, and I think, oh god, this is going to sound like overly, but I think it made me a better human being reading it. I think it just made me more understanding of the situation of other people. But I am shit scared to go back and reread it, just in case, one, it's not good, and two, whether actually it suffers from some things that you do where you revisit media from 20 years ago or something like that, and you go, oh Jesus, like that's pretty insensitive about so many things that we wouldn't say now. But I don't think it is. I do think it would hold up, but I'm a little bit scared to go back to it. And the artist on it, a lass called Pia Guerra, she, again, it was a different art style to what I was used to. I'd been very much sort of grown up in either the very much the superhero style or more horror comic-y style, and this was very much kind of real world. You know, it felt like someone drawing a scene in the street, and I was like, wow. So yeah, it really pulled me through. But yeah, maybe in this adventure, I will reread and hope that my love of it isn't destroyed.
So
come on, now it's for you. The number one, the numero uno. And in my head, I'm not going to say, but I have an idea of what your number one might be. And so I'm quite interested by this to see whether in our brief time together, I know you as well as I think I might know you.
Well, my number one, all it takes is one bad day. The greatest origin story of anyone, The Killing Joke. It is, as we've said about Joker a few times, because obviously a lot of my stuff is Batman. I love the Joker, and this is the one origin story that for the longest time was canon. I don't know if they've gone back on that recently, but it's been pretty much canon since it was created.
I think it's still canon, but I think they like to every now and again go, oh, I might have told a fib or two. But yeah, you know, like I think it is relatively canon still, yeah.
And you know, it is one of those of what one bad day can do to someone, because we've all had that one bad day where we've just gone, do you know what? If I was in America and guns were legal, there would be a massacre.
Anyone that I work with will unfortunately attest to how many days I threaten murder, how many times a day I do that. But luckily I just don't have the means or the desire to end up in prison. So that's the thing that stops me to this point.
Yeah, and you know, it is perfect, and it's a word that I will very rarely throw out. But the art style is timeless. There are pictures that are in this novel that are still used to this day as T-shirts, and as I've seen countless people with them as tattoos. And you know, it is a point where we get the Oracle. So you know, characters come out of this that are still used today, because of the events of that story. As I said, I read that a couple of times a year, every year since I got it again. It was the one when I was a kid that I went, fuck, this isn't Beano and Dandy and what I knew.
Yeah.
This isn't the early 90s animated TV show, which I thought that was dark enough, but fuck, this is dark. And it's the one that shows that this is a grown-up medium, not just for kids. And that was the first book that I ever read that said that to me. And then obviously,
and doing it in that world of those characters that can easily be for the kids, isn't it? You know, like these are, again, we go back to what we talked about last episode about both of our origins starting with Adam West Batman. And so you've seen Batman do the bat dance, you've seen Joker with like buzzers in his hand and stuff like that. And then you go, wow, this is grown up. Like, you've pulled this so far forward. One of the words you said there, perfect. I agree. I think this is perfect. I think this is comic book perfection. It probably would have been number 6 for me, and would have maybe jumped in. I think the only difference is that if this had been the thing that I read that gave me that, oh fuck, comics don't do this moment, I think it probably would have been my number 1. But I think some other things had kind of turned my head to that by the time I got to this. But yeah, I'm with you. And that art style, I mean, it is, as you say, iconic. I think probably it's hard with the Joker, isn't it? Because the Joker's got so many iconic looks. Because again, like for me, iconic looks for the Joker is Joker from the TV show, Jack Nicholson Joker, in later years Heath Ledger Joker, Joaquin Phoenix Joker even. But for comic books, when someone says Joker, the picture I see in my head is the picture from the front cover of The Killing Joke. That is Joker. And again, throughout the comic book, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's hauntingly beautiful, isn't it? Like, every scene, you can't take your eyes off it, but you're almost going, oh, there's just something so sad and bleak in this, and it kind of really pulls you into it, as you say, that sadness of what would happen to, and they say what would happen to me if I had one bad day, but anyone, like, it's just that that knife edge thing of going, we're all susceptible to leaning into our most darkest side.
And
if the situation pushes us that way, and a magical bit, and it does feature Batman, doesn't it? And it features, as you say, like Barbara Gordon and Jim Gordon, all those characters that from the comic books or the TV shows or the movies. But no matter how much they're in it, they're all bit part players to this Joker story, aren't they? They're used to kind of move it forward. But again, they're grown up versions of these characters. We've never seen the characters like this before, because up until now we'd either seen them in movies, TV, or the comic books. When even some of the kind of darker Frank Miller-esque stories that there had been in the comics, not to this level, not putting us so far into it. But yeah, again, for the third time, I'll use the term masterpiece for this. I think it is a masterpiece in visual storytelling, and just great, absolutely fantastic.
And again, it's another one with a perfect end, because it leaves so much to the imagination, that last page. Of does he?
And I think that's the great thing about it, without going into spoilery, is the fact that it has such a good does he, is it actually allows you, the reader, to finish it the way that you think it would go. It becomes your story at that point, because you've experienced that story. Like, he's put that down on the page and he's given you all of the pieces, but it's not like all of the pieces to learn who the murderer was in a whodunit. He's given you all those pieces to go, and now you finish that story in your head. And it probably says a lot about you as a person in how you decide that story finishes. Just so breathtaking, I think, on that part.
It's one of those of, if someone was to say, right, give me 3 books, that would be one of the first ones I'd give them, and go, if that doesn't vibe with you, maybe this isn't for you. And again, I think you said something really, really poignant there, of going, we can talk about it, and obviously we love it. And I think when we go through this, there'll be stuff where I go, oh, I think they'd like this, I think you'd like that, or if you like this sort of movie, you'd like that. But yeah, there are cases where you just go, this is not for you. But I think this is a very good example of going, I think this would catch so many people, because again, I just think it's unexpected, isn't it? I think people with their preconceived notions, or if they have watched it through other mediums, I think this would grab them with how impacting, how smart it is, and how unexpected the way the story is told is. Because
If you've only ever watched the 1960s Batman show, you're in for a hell of a shock if you read this, and that shock will be enough, I think, to pull you along to a degree in the story.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Obviously, we've seen the success of bad Jokers when Suicide Squad makes loads of money, and
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah,
no one needs that ever. But that's the thing. It's one of the things that annoys me, which would be something that we will do another episode on because it's a thing of mine, is the misconception of these characters from films. When you're like, no, actually, if you did some reading, you would see a very completely different thing and know exactly what it is. Whereas as this one, as you said, I think this makes more about you as a reader.
Yeah.
To sort of go, this is obviously where it will come from, and which side of it are you on?
Yeah, and I guess it does what some in any form what some of the greatest artistic creations do, which is it gets you to think about yourself, what you would do, and ask questions of yourself. And I know not always do people want that in everything, but I think there is that kind of inherent desire in us to have something that engages us that much, that to make us go, who am I? Who would I be? Would I do this? Would I not do this? And yeah, as I say, I keep harking back to it, but the end is just perfect. A perfect end to a perfect story. I think that's the honest truth for me. And yeah, I don't think there'll be a lot when we go through this show. I mean, I think we'll talk masterpiece, great, things like that a lot, but there's not often I think we'll say the term perfection. But for me, yeah, this is perfection. And God, who knows? Like, because this is a strange medium from that regard, because you have a writer who writes a story, you have a penciler who pencils it, you have an inker who inks it, you have a colorist who colors it, and I guess in any of those functions, it could go wrong. Like something just doesn't click. Whereas I think the whole team works perfectly together here, doesn't it? And to produce this wonderful product, and sort of kind of picking up on that. I mean, I guess the smartest and the best writers go out there and get an artist that they think are going to do the job that they want done. But yeah, what a beautiful tandem the penciler and writer does, and that's not to decry anyone else who had an involvement in it. But I think they're always your kind of your big base level. But and that is one hell of a number one, by the way, and that is the one I thought it was going to be. I did think you'd go with that, but
did I give a few tells away?
Well, but like. Yeah, I think the tattoo was a bit of a clue, but who knows? It might not have been. Like because I say sometimes things supersede it, or as we said when we were going through this. I mean, some of mine were, I'll say, were not the strongest stories that were ever written, but probably just resonated with me at the right time. But yeah, I'm kind of glad it's your number one, because it makes me feel good that I'm getting a good vibe already of what you like. And as I say, that it's nice. It's nice to talk about comic books with someone who has a love for the medium. But it also makes it even handier the fact that I can already kind of pick up that we're going to have some very similar styles now. I think it'll make it quite interesting when we sort of spin out of this to look at specific stories. And it is nice. It'll be nice for me to be able to kind of go, okay, I know you like this now.
Yeah.
Maybe you might like this as well. And there's always a bit of a risk element to that. You pick something out for someone and they go, yeah, thanks for that. That was rubbish. I'm never going to get those hours of my life back. But it makes it fun, I guess.
Yeah. So this was episode 2 of Seddon and Lacey's Comic Stash. Don't know what episode 3 will be yet because we haven't decided, but we will be back with episode 3.
By the way, before you say that, I just want to. I was going to do it at the beginning of the show, but I totally forgot of going. Just to let the world know, we recorded episode 1 and 2 back to back. I don't want you to think that 1, we either don't have changes of clothes at all, or 2, that we stay in these clothes all week because we are stank monsters. But yes, we will probably be releasing regularly, but when we record, I think we'll kind of figure that out on the fly. But I am right in thinking, and so I'm not, that hopefully we're leaning into episode 3 where we start to look at Nightfall, which is one of the Batman stories that you mentioned in your build-up. So
Yes, I should definitely have it finished by then, because I've got about 50 pages left of it, because it is a beast.
It is a beast. It is a chunky beast. But again, that's kind of, I think, when we look at how we put out our episodes, we've said what we want to do is we want to kind of look at some stories more in depth, and then we'll do episodes potentially like this where we might touch in on top 5s, or we might even touch on a particular topic. I am particularly looking forward to, like you mentioned for the last episode, some of the worst top 5s, but I think there'll be stuff that comes up. But for anyone watching, like, please give us some comments, because I think that will lead us down certain paths. It's very interesting for us to talk, and as I think we're already proving, we can talk for a long amount of time about this stuff. But it would be nice to kind of be able to resonate with the people who are watching and listening to this, so that we can talk about some of the stuff that you're interested in, or pick up some of that stuff. But yeah, if for anyone who hasn't read it, or anyone who has read it who wants to chime in, get yourselves a copy of the beast that is Batman Nightfall, and have a little read into it. Because we'll be discussing that when we come back next time.
Yes, and as always, like, subscribe, ring the bell. As I said, obviously, if any of the top 5s, either mine or Sed's, you agree, have any comments, or even your own top 5s, because
that's a good point.
With this medium, this ain't something that either of us have the knowledge of everything. We both are very much, very, very small fish in a very, very, very big pond.
Oh god, yeah.
That, anything that you've seen, the stuff that we like, recommendations, things similar, hit us up, because we are both very much, looking to go into more. So one of the episodes, obviously, that we've said is, obviously, we're going to do. I'll do a where to start Batman, sort of, and my sort of thing of that. Obviously, you're doing a Marvel one for me, because you're more Marvel than I am. So we both have weak points and sort of blind areas. So even if anyone listening, watching has a specialist area, give us a shout.
Something we touched on in this episode, and you just mentioned it there. There is so much release. There's so many companies that produce comic books that like, with the best will in the world. I mean, like, I don't think there's any human being that could read everything, and because of that, there's going to be so much great stuff that we'll just never get in our eye line. So we rely on you, the audience, to help us out with this, to point us in certain directions, and certainly, even if you point us in a direction of something we have read, again, it gives us that idea of going, oh, do you know what? That might be a decent episode to talk about it. So yeah, hit us up. That we said it earlier, the like and subscribe. But to be honest, for me, I'm much more interested in the comments. Like that. That's where we will. That's what will lead us down certain paths of this show. Is finding out from you guys what you like, what you don't like, and topics you'd be interested in discussing. So give us some likes, give us some subscribes, give us some comments.
Comments are good.
Comments are good.
So that will do for episode 2. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morrow.
Thanks for watching, and just remember, you can join the Cult of Egg by liking and subscribing to this YouTube channel. We release regular content where we talk about all things geek, all things pop culture, and all things that we're interested in. You can also come along and join the discussion on Facebook groups and Renaissance Cast. And you can join us on our Twitch channel where Stu regularly streams games. And if you'd like to support us, then please follow the link for the Patreon. Thanks very much.